We just wrapped up the hottest month of the year, but the high heat continues this weekend. Some areas may see record highs. We'll talk about when that finally lets up. The tropics also becoming more active. That's right, Atlantic hurricane season showing signs of life, and a storm is likely to impact the U.S. next week. We'll talk about who's at highest risk. And of course, we have severe weather opportunities across parts of the country, where those chances are greatest, where there may be some flooding rains. And we'll also take a look at the end of the video at what happened in July and what we're expecting for the month of August, where we are in the big picture of things. We're talking weather every week here, and if you got questions, I'm a meteorologist. I'll answer them right in the comments for you. Be sure to like and subscribe, and of course, if there's a part of the video you are mostly interested in, you can find the chapter right here at the bottom. We'll start with our upper air pattern, as always, gives us a good idea of what's going on in the big picture. And what you're going to notice as we move this forward is a big ridge, those red colors in the western U.S. That's a sign of a very hot air mass, and very hot weather is what we're going to see as we head into the weekend out there. So all of the western U.S. here, it's going to be hot. We'll be pushing record highs. Meanwhile, you look towards the eastern U.S., you see this trough here is what we call it. It's that sort of bow inwards. That's where you're going to see the greatest chance for storms, multiple round of storms, and potentially some severe weather this weekend. Eventually, once we get to next week, what you're going to see is that ridge begins to flatten out, but it spreads farther south and east too. So hotter weather expected in the south and central U.S. as we get into the start of next week. Meanwhile, that trough we were talking about, you can see it flattens out in the northeast. That means storm chances begin to diminish, and cooler weather may finally come back to some of those areas. But let's take a look at the actual surface temperatures and see what we can expect in terms of numbers. We'll start with temperature anomalies so we can see just how hot it is relative to average, and what you're going to see is a bunch of that bright orange color showing up in the northwestern U.S. That's where, if there are going to be records, and there very well may be, that's where they're going to be most likely. Still pretty hot out here in the northeast U.S. You're going to see some blue colors mixing in there. That's just dependent on where storms may set up, because otherwise it is going to remain very hot, relatively speaking, in the northeastern U.S. as well. Heading into Saturday, again, you can see just how hot it is across a good chunk of the country. Once again, though, the hottest areas may very well be the north central U.S., northwestern U.S., and of course, portions of the southwest as well, relative to average, running as high as 15 or 20 degrees above the mark. So that's where that high heat and humidity, well, at least high heat, maybe not so much humidity, is going to be. Now, as we move this through the rest of the weekend, you're going to see a general shift in where those anomalies are. The hottest weather relative to average begins to move towards the south central U.S. and southeastern U.S., and we also begin to see some cooler than average weather show up in the north central U.S. and northeastern U.S. And this is a pretty strong signal. Again, here, this is the biggest change as we head into the week. Those temperatures drop quite significantly in the northern part of the U.S., and the high heat, it begins to spread out more. Won't be quite as hot, but it will be more broad and shifting across the southern U.S. So as we begin the first week or two of August, this is more what our pattern is going to look like. As we take a look at actual temperatures here, you're going to see 90s up the East Coast on Friday. I mean, this is going to be pretty hot weather for almost everyone out there. Storms may cool things off in the afternoon, but that's what that brown and white color you're seeing is. Meanwhile, if we take a look at the western U.S., what you're seeing is a very broad area where temperatures, even the central U.S. too, are going to be in the 90s, and some areas may be in the hundreds as well, like central Texas or the southwestern U.S. And even on the lee side of a lot of these mountains in the northwest, highs may very well be in the hundreds. We'll move this into Saturday, and what you're going to notice is, again, a more broad level of high heat. I would expect temperatures on the East Coast out here to drop a little bit, more 80s than 90s, but still going to feel hot out there, especially with high humidity on the East Coast especially. But you look through the central U.S., and basically everyone in this area, almost the entire U.S., is going to be near or in the 90s, and some areas will also be in the hundreds, including the southwest U.S., which looks like it'll be in the 110s. And once again, if you're on the lee side of those mountains in the northwest U.S., very good chance you see hundreds once again on Saturday. On Sunday, those high temperatures remain up there, but remember that heat begins to shift farther south and east. Still very, very hot in the southwestern U.S., maybe pushing some records out there, and still very hot through the center of the country. But you'll notice the East Coast does begin to cool, although I will say the humidity is going to remain high out there on Sunday as well. I'll just give you a quick look at Monday, and once again, you can see where the highest heat is right there. Central U.S. is where it's really hot, still very hot in the western U.S., and in the northeast, we got one more hot day, it looks like, on Monday, and then things begin to cool as that new air mass comes in out of the north. So a bit of a different look here on Tuesday, and you can see let me get back to Tuesday for you, you'll be able to see that cutoff pretty significantly in the north central U.S. right here, really separating what will be some very hot weather, maybe some widespread hundreds in the south central U.S., from what will be some more widespread 70s and 80s in the northern U.S. And this is one of the biggest changes we have on tap as we begin the month of August. And this will take us through a good portion of the first full week of the month, too. Now, we'll take a look at the tropics, and this is our most recent disturbance centered right here around Haiti. And you're going to hear a lot more about this as we head into the weekend. So get ready. It'll be going across the news stations pretty soon here. But what we have is a National Hurricane Center saying a 40% chance for development in the next 48 hours. So basically this weekend. What you're looking at is just a cluster of thunderstorms out here. Nothing very organized, but it does look more organized than it did earlier in the week, and it's moving into a more favorable environment. So if we open up our next 7-day forecast, this is where the Hurricane Center is saying they are expecting it to become a tropical system at least in the next 7 days. They're giving it a 70% chance. So they're saying it's likely, I should say. They believe the development is most likely to occur in the Gulf. Now, there has been some discrepancies with exactly where this would develop, and we'll take a look at those right here. But for what it's worth, there has been a noticeable shift to the west. And so if you're in the Gulf, that's where you will want to be paying closer attention to this, especially as we head through the weekend and into next week. To give you an idea of the path this may take, we'll look at some of our models, our ensemble members, and what you're going to see here is the European model and its members, and what you're looking at right now is a pretty tight cluster of ensemble members. And again, this is on the west side of Florida. Now, just about a day ago, the European model was really more bullish on a storm track on the east side of Florida. So this has been a noticeable shift. And when you see a cluster this tight, all of those individual spots very close together, that's a signal for higher confidence. The model is more confident, at least that the range of outcomes is more narrow, and it's going to make a cut into the Gulf in this case. Now, we can also look at the American model to give us an idea of what it's thinking. It's always good to use multiple sources here, and it's really on board with the same thing. If anything, it might be slightly farther to the west, but you're noticing the same thing. Once again, the system trying to get into the Gulf here. Now, the strength is something that is, I'd say, least certain right now, but we can take a look at some of the models and see what they're saying for that too. And here's what you're looking at in terms of modeled intensity. Now, this is certainly subject to change as this storm begins to develop. There is certainly more uncertainty when it is just an invest, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at, and what you're seeing is a cluster of members out here. Expecting it to be tropical storm strength as we look out over the next week. Really not a lot of suggestion that this will become anything significant, but for what it's worth, there are a few members suggesting that it may reach Category 1 strength. Now, I'll say even if this isn't a super strong storm in terms of wind speed, there is some suggestion that this will be a slow mover as it moves into the Gulf, and that could present some significant issues with flooding rain. I don't want to go too far into that right now, though, because simply put, there's a lot we don't know. But that flooding rain is something that you will need to at least be thinking about if you live in the Gulf until we get more information and can say more confidently just how quickly it's going to get in and get out. But we hope it gets out quickly in this case. Now, high heat in the tropics are definitely our two biggest stories, but severe weather is a possibility. Don't sleep on that, as much of the country has the potential to see at least some level of strong to severe storms over the next couple of days. That includes the weekend and the start of next week. And we'll take a look here. This is really, as we look ahead at Friday, the bottom three images here. What you're seeing is perhaps a chance at some damaging wind and maybe even some large hail on the East Coast on Friday. Certainly that's where we're going to kick things off at least. But that chance for severe weather will continue over the next few days. What you're looking at here as we move into Saturday is a reasonably strong signal that there may be some severe weather on the East Coast once again. Now, I do believe this is largely a damaging wind threat you're seeing. And this one guidance is suggesting the greatest chance is really along the Carolinas up into Virginia on the East Coast. But you'll notice that even on Sunday, we have a low chance for severe weather across the East Coast. I believe it'll be isolated, damaging wind gusts out there. There is a lot of instability, and we do have the chance for some hail in spots. But after we get through Sunday, that chance for severe weather, it begins to diminish. You see a couple of suggestions, some hints where there may be some stuff over the next few days, but it's really not as organized, and I'm not so bullish on the forecast in those places, at least where it's suggesting there may be severe weather. I just don't really see the parameters coming together to create it. At least if there are going to be strong storms, they'd be very isolated. But certainly want to keep an eye on Saturday out here for the East Coast, and even Sunday too, for many of the same areas, though Saturday certainly looks like it may be the bigger deal of the 2 days, especially if you're on the middle portion of the East Coast. Now we can take a look at our precip map. You're probably used to seeing this. And as we move it forward through Friday, what you're seeing is really those pop-up storms, more general storms, but a low chance for severe weather as we looked at out here on Friday, especially in the mid-Atlantic and portions of the southeast. So that's where you have that threat potentially for damaging wind gusts, right where you're seeing all those storms pop up. And you can see that low pressure system in the middle there too. That's just another suggestion that the air is going to be more unstable out there, and we're going to have the more forcing, better kick for storms to get going. I'll also mention, though, there is the chance for some heavy rain in some of the mountainous areas in the southwestern U.S. Could even be some localized flooding out there, too, with just how dry it is. As we move this forward into Saturday, you'll see overnight those storm chances really begin to diminish. There may still be a lingering storm or two, but we get back into Saturday, and I was talking about the East Coast here. This is where we also have another chance for some strong to severe storms. That's where our best chance for severe weather is going to be. That damaging wind threat you can see is going to be greater, but you can also see this sort of broken line here ahead of an approaching cold front. That's what's going to be the kick for perhaps storms and anything severe that may form. Still in the southwestern U.S., chance for some pop-up storms. And the greatest storm activity here is going to be in the afternoon on Saturday. Moving into Sunday, and like I said, I'm not as bullish on severe storm chances, but there could be some strong storms that pop up out here in the northeastern U.S. Depends on how quick that front gets through, and also just depends on how much forcing we're able to get out there. These may just be general storms that pop up. They may be quite isolated. I wouldn't expect too much, but there is a low chance for severe weather. We move it into Monday, and that storm threat begins to diminish. There could be a couple rounds of rain or storms that move through the northeast. However, I believe that this model may be overdoing it a little bit, as the front will have likely passed through here. There may be some showers that pop up on the backside out of the instability that occurs, but I don't believe anything significant will happen on Monday. Meanwhile, we have our cooler air mass coming in. That may bring rain to the north central U.S. to begin the week, and we're still very hot and dry in the western U.S. thanks to that big ridge we were talking about earlier on. That's really going to prevent any of these waves of energy from breaking into those areas, so I wouldn't expect significant precipitation. And if we walk into Tuesday, you'll see once more here, could be some rain that comes into the U.S. along that new front. There's still a lot of uncertainty with that, but it is going to be a changing pattern, so I would be on the lookout for perhaps some unsettled weather, maybe not severe weather, but some unsettled weather as we get into the beginning and middle part of next week, as that cooler air comes into the northern U.S., while meanwhile the hot air remains really all across the southern U.S., and even the western U.S. will be hot too, of course. And as always, good to look at our excessive rainfall outlook. If you're worried about flash flooding, you can see Friday where those storms are going to occur really anywhere from Wisconsin down into Kentucky. That's where you have that slight risk for some kind of flash flooding. And where we're looking at that rain in the mountains in the southwest, you can see that marginal risk for any flash flooding too. Some of those downpours, of course, landing on the dry soils. It doesn't take as much rain out there, I will put it that way. Move it into Saturday, where those storms are in the mid-Atlantic, parts of the Midwest out there, and even the Southeast. That's where you have your greatest chance for any kind of flooding. Southwest still included in that as well. Moving it into Sunday, wherever those storms are, of course, you're going to have a low chance for flash flooding. Same thing out there in the Southwest once again. Now we begin to see some probabilities show up on Florida. You may have noticed that on our previous precip map. That would be our Invest 97. That would be the tropical system that we were talking about not long ago. If it develops, that's where you may see some potential for flooding. That would be in Florida, as it is most likely right now. And you're going to see this again as we head into Monday and Tuesday, really. We have that threat for some kind of flooding rain, especially if the system does make a move to the east after potential landfall. We're still a ways out there, but those are the areas, as I mentioned a moment ago, that you really should be thinking about the heavy rain potential. And where we looked at that quick hitting system in the north central U.S., northern Midwest, that's where you may see some potential flooding rain next week too. Just another reinforcing sign that our weather becomes a bit volatile as we head into the middle of next week and early in middle of next week, and our weather just really begins to change up. As mentioned at the start of the video, in case you're curious about what happened in July, I just want to take a quick look back. These were our temperature deviations, and what you're seeing is July was very warm in the northeastern U.S. and very warm, hot we'll call it, in the western U.S. That's where our greatest temperature anomalies were, generally 3 degrees above average in the northeast, and as high as 5 to even 7 degrees above average in the western U.S., even as much as it looks like 10 in some spots out there. Meanwhile, the central U.S. was a bit cooler, nothing crazy anomalous, but a little bit of a break from the heat out there. And we can also look at the precipitation and where we were relative to our averages. Those red colors suggest much lower than average precip for the month of July, green the opposite. Very dry and very hot out there in the western U.S. Certainly, we're getting into wildfire season, so not ideal. Meanwhile, some of those cooler temperatures in the central U.S., especially in Texas, coincided with above average rainfall. Now, remember, Beryl early in the month had a lot to do with that significantly above average rainfall in the southeastern portion of Texas. But even into the southeast U.S., we had quite a bit of storm activity that kept things pretty wet. And depending on where you were in the northeast, it was really hit or miss with storms that provided most of the rain out there. And to wrap things up with a forward-looking note, August, per the Climate Prediction Center's recent outlook, likely to be hotter than average across the western U.S. We've seen that ridge set up. We know the month is beginning hotter than average, but it does seem as though the ridge may maintain itself for a good chunk of this month, and that's why that area likely to stay pretty hot. The East Coast likely to stay above average too. Now, there is some variability in the northern U.S. Depends how much that cooler start to the month can hold on. But at least the Climate Prediction Center thinking that ridge does build back westwards off the Atlantic and allows that hotter weather to persist on the East Coast. We'll wait and see what happens there, but certainly it doesn't look like summer is going to end abruptly by any means, should continue for a bit. And in terms of precipitation, nothing too crazy. And you can see some areas maybe a bit drier, the northwestern U.S., the south central U.S., certainly the month starting off very hot in those places. And precipitation, really not too much of a strong signal of anyone getting significantly above or below average rainfall. Above average in this case, though, does seem most likely in the southeastern U.S., and we'll see how long that trough can persist in the northern U.S. That would allow for some greater precip out there, most likely. So we'll wrap things up there. Of course, the big story is going to be what happens with that tropical system, and we'll be back on the weekend to check in on that, give you an update on what you can expect. And we have a new week coming up next week with some big changes in the forecast, so be sure to come back as we take a look at everything that's ahead as we head into the first full week of August.